Welcome to the latest edition of the Shukri Wrights podcast with your host, Shukri Wrights. I'm excited to be joined today by the one and only Pat Lane, who is the co-host of Pat's Nation Pod and a writer for Pat's Pulpit as part of SB Nation. That's where you can find his fantastic work covering the New England Patriots. Pat, good morning. How are you on this finally lovely morning here in Massachusetts?
Hey, thanks, man. I'm doing well. I'm doing well. It's a nice introduction. Appreciate the nice words there. It's been a fun off season. It's been a fun off season, and like you said, man, I'm ready for the warm weather.
Oh,
So I'm
same.
happy about that.
My pleasure. Like, listen, like the warm weather means only one thing to me, one thing only. That mini camp is around the corner,
That's right.
and to get this all fired up. What are three headlines that you are most excited for, keeping an eye out for as mini camp approaches?
So, I mean, Mac Jones is the biggest one, right? Everyone's
For
looking at the
sure.
progression of Mac Jones and how he's going to progress and how he's going to learn the offense and what he's going to look like in practice. And I think, I'm excited to see how that kind of all plays out. We're going to see, how that works. And what he'll do. I think bringing Hoyer in was a nice addition for him. He knows the offense inside and out, so he can definitely give Mac a hand, which is good. Second for me is the defense, man. Defense has so many interesting pieces on it. You got the young guys, right? And Uche and Duggar and Barmore now and Perkins and all these other guys that are young, but then you also have the older guys, right? You bring Van Noy back. You got McCourty there still, Gilmore, Jackson. So like they have a ton of talent and depth on the defense. I'm looking for this defense to be a top 5 in the NFL this year. So like I'm very, very excited about the way they can go. And what Bill has done is drafted these guys that are not typical Patriots guys, right? They are flashy playmakers with great, athletic traits. And we haven't necessarily had guys like that. And yeah, we have guys like that. McCourty's obviously very fast and things like that. But like these are explosive playmaking guys that you don't see every day, right? Athleticism wise. So I'm excited about that. And then third for me is just the pass catchers, really, right? The tight ends, obviously, but then also the wide receivers and how that's going to look because last year's passing offense was a disaster, a complete
Oh, without
disaster,
question. Yeah.
one of the worst I've ever seen, right? And and the thing is that it's okay, fine. Some of that was on Cam for sure, but also like they had no tight ends, their receivers were terrible. So like now you bring in the two best tight ends in free agency, and you bring in two more wide receivers in free agency as well. So like you're expecting that part of the offense to be significantly better than it was. And so everyone's just kind of excited to see how it's going to shake out, what they're going to do, how they're going to run it. But again, now remember now in training camp and well, I guess there was no preseason last year, but in training camp, Cam never even ran the ball in training camp, right? It was all throwing.
Sure.
And then of course they get into games and Cam really threw the ball, right? Couldn't really throw the ball very well. So what we see in training camp might be a little bit different than what we see overall, like, once the season comes around, but still it's still going to be fun to kind of see those guys out there competing each day.
One of the things I'm most curious about is the defense, and you touched on it marvelously in that explanation just now, in which that I expect that this defense is going to be a lot better this year. One of the surprising moves that they made is that they went out and they got Jaylen Mills, formerly of the Philadelphia Eagles, and I think that's a sneaky good move. You're adding to the secondary in that regard, but then there's also the question of Stephon Gilmore, his contract situation, and that leads me to wonder if you're Bill Belichick and if you're a Patriots fan, what it should excite you in regards to the Jaylen Mills addition, and what should concern you regarding Stephon Gilmore's status as we approach training camp?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I love the Mills signing because he can kind of do everything. Now they overpaid him a little bit. I think he's not a prototypical outside corner. You saw
Yeah.
him struggle with that. But he kind of can do everything. And they like that about him. Like he can cover in the slot, he can play safety, he can play corner, he can even come down in the box a little bit as a linebacker, although not really his forte, but he can kind of do that if you have to. So he can play all over the field and he gives you a lot of position flexibility. And we know the Patriots love that, right? So You have Adrian Phillips who can play safety and linebacker. You have Mills who can play corner and safety. Like you have a bunch of guys that can do a bunch of different things, which is good. And so I do like the Mills signing from that perspective. I think people look at him as an outside corner and they say, "Oh my God, he was terrible," and that's true. Like if they try to stick Jaylen Mills at outside corner, it's not going to go well. But that's not what they're going to do because that's not what he does well. So I expect him to do well in this offense, in this defense, I should say. Is he going to have a ton of like huge plays or what? I don't know about that, but like I think he's just going to be a consistent player, and again can fill in a bunch of different roles. Bill loves to have those kind of chess piece guys, right? That can kind of play all over the field. So,
Yeah.
so I expect that from him. Here's the thing with Gilmore, right? Gilmore's on a 1-year deal. You touched on it, $7 million. What they did, and the reason why it's so low, I'm sure people know, but if they don't, the Patriots gave him basically an advance last year. He said he wanted more money in his contract. So they said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to give you money from your 2021 contract and give it to you this year instead. So that's what they did, which is fine. Great last year, but now this year he has this 1-year, $7 million contract. Never going to play for that, right? So he's just not going to do that. So you're going to have to renegotiate his deal somehow, which means you're going to have to give him an extension. Now, you also have J.C. Jackson, who is a restricted free agent, signed his 1-year second-round tender for like $3 million, like nothing. He signed for 1 year for nothing. You're going to have to extend him after this season if you want to. Right now, you could let him walk and get a 3rd-round comp for him, in 2 years. Fine, if that's what they decide to do. I would expect, and maybe they won't. I would expect probably either you're going to move Jackson or you're going to move Gilmore. To me, it just makes too much sense. You can get a 2nd-round pick back for probably either of them.
Oh yeah.
I think the Patriots would probably rather move on from Jackson than Gilmore, even though Gilmore's older. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's kind of my thought process behind it. Now, I think the big question is what Gilmore wants. If Gilmore wants a 4-year deal, like he wants this year and then 4 more, the Patriots can't.
It's not going to happen.
And that's it, right? He's 31. Like this is never going to happen. Now, if he wants this year and 2 more years, well, now the Patriots can do that, right? So it's just going to depend on whether they can get a contract worked out with Gilmore. If they don't get a contract worked out with Gilmore before the season starts, he will be traded because he's not going to play for that 1 year, $7.5 million, and somebody will pay him because he's a great player,
exactly.
Right? He wasn't Defensive Player of the Year last year. He wasn't that level last year, but he was very good last year. So, someone will pay him because he deserves it. And I'm hoping it'll be the Patriots. But again, it just really comes down to how much does he want and how many years does he want that for? I think that takes precedence over the money. I think the Patriots are willing to pay the money. It's just we're not going to pay you for 4 years. We'll pay you for 2 or 3, but we're not going to pay you for 4 or 5. And I think that's going to be the key. But again, if we start week 1 with Gilmore and Jackson starting at both outside corners, I'd be surprised.
I'd be shocked because I've always had this belief in terms of Gilmore that if you're going to extend him, it can't be 4 years. I would prefer it to be 3 years, and age being the big reason because let's be honest, cornerbacks don't age well, especially outside cornerbacks when you're needed to cover those speedy receivers on the outside. And that's going to and as you get older, and if you lose that step, that's going to create mismatches for you when you're going up against potential number 1 receivers for the other team. Now, and speaking of defense, the area of the defense that I was most pleasantly surprised with was the defensive line and the moves that they made.
Yep.
You talk about you add guys like Montravius Adams. You go out and you draft a guy like Christian Barmore, and then also you go out and you bring in a Matt Judon in free agency. What is the thinking in Bill Belichick's mind in terms of we got to get beefier along the interior line while adding to the pass rush that was almost non-existent in 2020?
Right. Yeah, 24 sacks last year, which was, towards the bottom of the league. So not great there. They also couldn't stop the run, right? So it was like it was twofold. Now, I think a lot of that comes from the fact that they had no linebackers last year, right? I mean, like Adrian Phillips was your number 1 linebacker last year at times for, I would say, for the majority of the season. Like that's a disaster. And so, you beef up the linebacking core. Hightower comes back. It looks like at least Hightower's coming back. Van Noy comes back, which is big, right? I think Bentley, Bentley was awful last year, but I think in the role that he is designed to play, he'll be better, right? In that a Landon Roberts type role, he'll be better. Matthew Judon is definitely going to help on the edge. Like there's going to be guys that are going to be there to help, I think. And like you said, you bring in Henry Anderson, you bring in Devin Godshaw, you draft Christian Barmore, you draft Ronnie Perkins. Like they're just building up this front seven to now get to this place where, okay, we have guys that can stop the run and we have guys that can get after the passer. And Lawrence Guy, I love Lawrence Guy, but he's not really a pass rusher, right? But he's good against the run. He's a 3-4 defensive end who's going to two gap and play well against the run and be stout. But if he's the only guy that can stop running your defensive line, you're in trouble, right? And that's what happened last year. So you're going to be in a situation this year. I think they want to run more odd man fronts, 3-man fronts with a nose tackle and two DNs. But again, that's like a base defense. They don't play base. They play base like 30% of the time. So like they're not really going to be in that a ton, but they'll be in that from time to time. But again, the linebackers are so key in your run game, right? If the linebackers can help fill and stop the run, that's when you're successful. Because you two gap with the D line, but like it only matters if the linebackers can get off a block and make a tackle, right? So that's huge for them. And I think building it and what they've done on the defensive line is they have a bunch of guys that can do a bunch of different things. Winovich can put his hand in the dirt or he can stand up. Uche can put his hand in the dirt or he can stand up. Judon can put his hand in the dirt or he can stand up. Like they have guys where it's like, okay, we don't know where these guys are going to go. Ronnie Perkins, they're working Ronnie Perkins at outside linebacker. So like maybe he'll be a DN, maybe he'll be an outside linebacker. So they're going to be guys that can play all over the defensive line and all over the front seven. Yeah. That's really going to help them because you can come out with a defense and the offense doesn't really know what you're going to be doing, right? And so that's kind of key for them as well. And I love that fact. I love the fact they have those guys. You get the explosive guys, like Winovich, like Uche, like Perkins, I think, and Barmore really on the inside is an explosive guy. You have that so you can get after the passer, which is great. But Perkins, 90 PFF was the only guy in college football last year to have an above 90 grade rushing the passer and above 90 grade stopping the run.
Which said a lot, by the way.
Yes, it did. It did. And he dropped because he got suspended for he failed a drug test, something like that. And so he drops, he was a top 30 pick, top 30, top 40 pick, and he drops to all the way to 96. So they even said Mike Reese came out with an article this week saying that based on all the things, there was like a 1% chance that he'd be there at 96 for the Patriots, and he fell all the way to 96. So I love that pick. I love the Barmore pick. Like those two guys are going to help shore up this defensive line. And again, you just add them to the guys they've been bringing in, the Uches. McGrone, it looks like, is going to wait till next year, but like the Uches, the Winovich, the Duggars, like all those guys are going to contribute to making this a better, faster, more explosive defense.
From defensive line to offensive line. Because listen, I'm going to save my fastball for when it gets to 3-2 when we start talking about the quarterbacks, because the offensive line I looked at, and as much as we gave grief to Cam Newton, the quarterback, last season, I do believe that the offensive line was part of the problems offensively. They go out and they bring back Trent Brown, which shocked me because I didn't expect New England to go out and bring back Trent Brown after having him in 2018, and then as well as you're gonna have Ted Karras back. You're gonna have on David Andrews back as well. When you first heard about the news regarding Trent Brown, in terms of the Patriots bringing him back, what surprised you, if anything at all, in terms of the signing, and what does that tell you in terms of the state of the offensive line for the Patriots heading into 2021?
Yeah, I mean, I loved it. I loved them bringing him back. Now he's on a 1-year deal, so we'll see what happens. But he's come out. He said, this is home. I love it here, and he loved playing here. Of course, now his only year he played, he won the Super Bowl, so of course he loves it here. But if you can get this guy to buy in and play the way he did in 2018, you're going to have one of the best offensive lines in football, right? You're bringing back on Onwenu, who was great last year. And not only was he great last year, he was great. He played right tackle, right guard, left he was all over the field, right? So now you have a guy that says, okay, boom, you're playing guard. Stay there. You're not moving, right? And so you have what looks like it's going to be, he's going to play, I think right guard and Shaq plays left guard. So you're going to have Onwenu and Brown on the same side, which is just almost unfair. And then you have Shaq Mason, of course, one of the best guards in football at left guard, and then Isaiah Wynn at left tackle. Now, if Wynn can stay healthy, you're talking about a phenomenal offensive line, and then combine that with David Andrews, who I was so happy they brought back because you saw in 2019 when he was out, he's the quarterback of that offensive line. So when he's not there, the offensive line isn't as good, right? So I look at it and say, okay, not only do they have great starters, but I thought Justin Herron really played well last year. If it wasn't for Onwenu playing so well as a rookie, I think, Herron would have gotten a lot more buzz about how well he played at the tackle position. And so now he's your swing tackle and can step in at right or left tackle depending on if someone gets hurt or if someone isn't playing well or whatever the case may be. Karras is a great guy to back up really all the interior line spots, right? Can back up center, but can also can play either of the guard spots. So you really have a lot of position flexibility on the offensive line. So the starters are great. The backups are great. Like, this is another one where, like, they're a top 3 offensive line in football, in my opinion. Like, they're great. Now, again, that means Isaiah Wynn stays healthy. Trent Brown buys back in and plays the way he did in 2018. And Onwenu continues to progress the way he's been progressing. But if those 3 things happen, I mean, this is going to be one of the best offensive lines in football, and that's going to really help them because this is what they're doing, right? And people have talked about this, and this has kind of been the discussion in this offseason. Harris, big back. Stevenson, who they drafted in the 4th round, big back. Their offensive line is massive. So now, and Cam Newton is 265 pounds, right? So as defenses get smaller and faster, now the Patriots are saying, oh, you're going to get smaller and faster? Great. We're going to beef up on the offensive line. We're going to bring in a bunch of big dudes, and we're going to run the ball down your throat, and there's not a damn thing you can do about it.
And I want to point out real quick that the offensive line, I've noticed that when I was going through the depth chart, none of them are smaller than 6'2". They're all 6'2", 6'3", 6'4", 6'5", and it's like, no, these guys are, as you mentioned, they're large, which plays well into the blocking for the run game. And speaking of which, I just want to quickly ask, as you continue, you go out and you add 2 of the best tight ends in the league from last season in Hunter Henry and Jonnu Smith. In terms of run blocking, how effective do you think Hunter Henry and Jonnu Smith can be when it comes time to run the ball and be able to open on running lanes for the running back?
That's a good question. I mean, I think Smith is a better blocker than Henry, but they're both willing blockers, I think. They're not great at it. They're not like Rob Gronkowski level, but they're decent. They're decent run blockers. And so you have those guys in there. You also have Asiasi, who was a very good run blocker in college. Now, that didn't really translate last year, but he was a very good run blocker in college and a very willing guy to block in the run game as well. So I think him now as a 3rd tight end there, you can bring out 3 tight ends, and instead of your 3rd tight end being an offensive tackle, right? Yeah. Your 3rd tight end can be a pass catcher. And now you get 3 guys in the offensive line plus the guys that you have already on the offensive line. 3 tight ends, I'm sorry, on the offensive line, plus the 5 offensive linemen you have. Now you get 8 guys in there, and it's like, yeah, okay, great. We could come on a 3 tight end set, and we could pound the ball down your throat, or we could come in a 3 tight end set and split out both Henry and Smith and have Asiasi in line. And now you're like, oh boy, like we just came out to our big package. Now our middle linebacker has to go out and cover Jonnu Smith one-on-one. Like that's not what we want, right? So those are things where they can kind of play with the matchups there. And I love the fact that, yes, they can absolutely, and that's one of the things that people have been talking about this offseason is that the Patriots kind of zagged, I guess, while everyone else was zigging, right? Everyone's going faster. And Philip Perry wrote an article about this, a great article I thought about this, about, you look at the 40 times speed, the combined 40 times speed, Patriots are last in the league. Like that's because their skill position players are 2 tight ends. Like, of course, it's gonna be last in the league if your 2 skill position players are tight ends. They're not named Darren Waller, right? So they're gonna be a little bit slower, but they're beefing up. They're saying, all right, we're gonna run you over, right? And we're gonna create matchup problems. And so that's ways to create matchup problems. Then you bring in a guy like Aguilar who has the speed now to take the top of the defense off if he can. And so now you say, okay, great. You want to play big against us? Then we'll throw it on you. You want to play small against us? Then we'll run it down your throat. And they're going to create matchup problems. And that's the one thing that McDaniels, I think, does better. That's the thing he does best, in my opinion, is find those matchup discrepancies and say, okay, great, you're going to bring your big package out. Awesome. Now you have your run stuffing middle linebacker split out wide, covering Jonnu Smith one-on-one in space. And now you're screwed. So we're going to run a quick slant on you. You got no chance, right? So those are the types of things that they're going to be able to take advantage of. And then again, like I said, okay, great. We got 2 tight ends out in the field. You're going to run the dime package and put a bunch of D-backs out there. We're just going to run you over and pick up 7 yards every time we run the ball, So I think the matchup nightmares are real. And I do like that. I do like the flexibility, I guess I would say, that they give your offense,
Absolutely. And one of the things that stood out to me in terms of the Patriots offseason as a whole, as we all know the big headline, the Patriots went out and they spent as if they just went Christmas shopping.
Mm-hmm.
But I have an interesting question. I thought about, and I've thought about this over the last couple of months, pardon me, is that the Patriots have never, prior to this offseason, been known as a team that spent big in free agency. Yet this offseason, there were so many holes on this roster. We talked about the defensive line needed to improve. It needed to do work in terms of getting skilled players, and as well as improving at the wide receiver position. Why did Robert Kraft come out and voice his displeasure regarding the Patriots spending after initially it seemed as if he was happy with the improvements, but he was not happy with the spending of the money?
Well, it's a good question. I think he wasn't not necessarily unhappy with the spending. I think what he was saying, which I think verbalized it, which I thought was an interesting thing, right? Mm-hmm. What he verbalized, what we were kind of all thinking, was that you have to spend in free agency because you haven't been able to acquire the assets through the draft or however else to build this roster back up, right? The tight end position, you've tried a little bit, right? You drafted 2 guys last year, but you ignored it while Gronk was here, right? Mm-hmm. They passed on Dallas Goedert. They passed on the kid from they passed on Dawson Knox in the 3rd round too, which who knows, but they passed on Mike Gesicki. Like, they passed on both of those guys. They could have taken either of those tight ends. They would have fit seamlessly into this offense, right? But they passed on both.
Also, DK Metcalf, which I have not forgiven the Patriots for as well. Sorry, not sorry.
You know what? And DK, listen, I don't blame you. I don't blame you at all. DK, you can explain away the DK one for me. The AJ Brown one for me will haunt me forever. Like, the fact that they passed on AJ Brown when he's a damn Patriots fan, like he was a freaking Patriots fan. He was so good, and they passed on him anyways. And it's like, that one kills me, because the DK one, at least, like, I get it. Like, his 3-cone was worse than Tom Brady's 3-cone. Like, it was bad. I get that. But like, AJ Brown, how do you pass AJ Brown? But anyways, but that was the thing for me. Like, yes. So they've absolutely haven't done a good enough job building that offense and defense. And now look, the Patriots looked at it and said, well, there's inefficiencies in the market, right? We let Brady go. We took a huge cap hit on the dead cap. So we had no money to play with last year. The only reason Cam Newton played last year was because he played for $1 million, right? That's the only reason he was here. Otherwise, you were rolling out Jarrett Stidham every week. Like, that's what they were going to do. And so you got Cam, fine, worked. It was fine. I mean, you went 7-9 with a team that probably shouldn't have gone 7-9, and so it worked. But you wanted more, right? And I think Kraft voicing his displeasure was interesting because you never hear him say that. Mm-hmm. But I do think at a certain point that was him kind of saying to Bill, like, look, I get it, Bill. I'll spend the money. I got no problem. We want to win. That's what we want to do. Like, Kraft wants to win. Like, and people he's an owner and he's cheap and everything else, but like, he wants to win at the end of the day, right? So like, he's willing to pay the money if he has to, but he's kind of like, well, we wouldn't have had to pay all that money if we had drafted right the last 3-4 years, right? And they've gotten some players here, but I think the argument that they have by and large struggled in the draft is accurate, right? I mean, it's pretty accurate right now. I do think the last few years, you're starting to see things turn around. I loved last year's draft. I thought Bill kind of bucked the trend a little bit, right?
Oh yeah.
And this what I said is that, the way I said it was that, okay, he used to take chances on guys like Jordan Richards, right?
Hmm.
Who his nickname in college was Coach, because he knew every single position on the field, knew what everyone should be doing on every single play, right? So if anyone on the Stanford defense had a question, they'd go to Coach, right? And he'd say, "Oh yeah, you're supposed to be doing this on this play." Like, he knew everything inside and out, but he just wasn't a talented player, right? Like, so he used to take chances on guys like that. Last year, he took chances on guys like Doug Renouche, who, yeah, there's questions about the jump they're going to make, and not a ton of tape and film on these guys,
Hmm.
but they're exceptional athletes, right? And so that's what wins in the NFL now, especially at those skill positions. So I think Bill's starting to figure that out. But I do think you know, the comments were interesting from Kraft, right?
Oh
It was
yeah.
kind of a little bit of a wake up call to Bill to be like, hey, look, I get it, I'll pay the money, but I know, I see it. We all see it, but I see it too. Like, we haven't done a good enough job building this team right now. And that's why we're in the position that we're in. Right. And I think I love that from him, because he's not calling out Bill. He's not verbally saying it, but he kind of is at the
It's,
same time.
it's
And,
kind of
and,
like
and I
giving him
like
like a
that.
little kick in the rear end, if you will.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And Bill does that with his players all the time. He does that with players all the time without throwing them under the bus. He kind of says things that are true, that, it's like, hey, this is what we're doing. He did it with Brady. He drafted Jimmy G in 2014, and then he said, we all know the contract situation and the age of our quarterback, and it was like, everyone was like, what? And then
Yeah.
they won 3 Super Bowls. It worked out. So we'll see if Kraft's comments have a similar effect on Belichick.
I think it will, because listen, Belichick has got an ego the size of the sun, if not combined three suns altogether.
Right.
And look, listen, no one likes to hear that. Oh, they're on the hot seat and so forth. And I was one of, and probably still. I know I am. I still am one of those that say, listen, it's on Bill to turn this ship around this season or else, because I was very openly critical of Bill Belichick's decisions at time during the season last season, and I get that. Well, the team had the whole COVID situation, and Cam didn't look right after the third week against the Las Vegas Raiders, and so all these built-in excuses and so
Yeah.
forth. But now I look at the moves that he's made, which also I should also include him going out and signing Nelson Aguilar as well to the receiving core here in New England. Bill, you better hope and pray that the signings that you've made are going to bring this team back into contention. I don't know about Super Bowl contention yet, because you still got Buffalo to deal with in your division, but
Right.
at least back in playoff contention. So, on a grading scale, how would you grade this offseason for the New England Patriots based on the moves that they've made?
I mean, to me, it's an A plus. Like, they're the most improved team in football by far, right? They improved significantly through free agency, more than any other team, maybe more than any other team in NFL history. Wow, that's not true. Tampa Bay last year, but like, they improved more in free agency than any team by far this year. And then they also improved. They got some guys in the draft as well, and the COVID opt out stuff. Duggar's a guy who probably would have never saw the field last year if Pat Chung was here. He played a ton last year. Uche was a guy that probably would have never saw the field last year. He played a decent amount last year when he was healthy. So, like, those guys that weren't necessarily going to be getting time were able to get time, and now you're gonna see them make that jump, that second year leap. Hopefully, looks like they're gonna have a full offseason to work with. So, uh, I'm expecting big things from this team. I mean, I don't know how you could give the offseason anything other than an A or an A plus. I will say, just on your comments, Bill Belichick will never, ever, ever be on the hot seat in New England. Okay. Like, never. It doesn't matter. Like, they could go 0-16 the next. I mean, what was someone saying? Somebody was saying that, like, I forget what it was. Like,
you,
it
you
was
can go
something
0 and
like,
16 for like the next, I think, 3 or 4 years, and you still have a winning record. Like,
right,
which is
right. I mean,
something
something
outrageous like
stupid
that.
like
Yeah.
that. Yeah, yeah. So it's one of those things where it's like, it doesn't, like, it just doesn't make a difference. Like, 9 Super Bowls. Now, I know a lot of that was Brady. I get it, but, like, and you want to see at least them be competitive. But last year, again, last year was like an off year for them. It was basically a reset for them. And Bill was honest. I mean, Bill said that, right? The offseason came and he's like, look, last year was the cap situation was. Our hands were tied. We had no money. We couldn't do anything. So we were stuck. And everyone was like, he's throwing out excuses. And I'm like, you asked the guy to be honest, and he was finally honest. And then you were pissed that he was honest.
Don't you love the Boston market in which that we live in? Like, I mean,
right. I mean, that's never good enough, But it's so I do think he was honest about that. And then he said, like, okay, we're going to build back up and we'll see where it goes. Now you're right. You got Buffalo in the division. Miami is a very good team. And I think Flo is a great coach. So you got 3 great coaches. I think Robert Salah has his work cut out for him. But I think he's also a very good coach too. So you have the possibility now. You have 4 very well coached teams in the AFC East. And if Zach Wilson can become something, now you're talking about 4, potentially very good quarterbacks in the AFC. So it's like, you're going to have some tough competition, right? But I expect this team, I'd be surprised if this team doesn't have at least 10 wins. I'd be very surprised if this team doesn't have at least 10 wins. And I think that's the goal at this point. I wouldn't be surprised if the Bills, Dolphins, and Patriots all made the playoffs. Because I think they're all that good. I really do. And so, we'll see. Don't forget the Patriots playing a 3rd place schedule now. So like it makes their schedule a little bit easier, right? So they have one of the easiest schedules in the NFL. Now, of course, that can change because teams look different from year to year, right? But still, as a 3rd place schedule, you get to play Houston. Like, that's pretty nice, right? You get to play Houston instead of playing Tennessee or Indianapolis. That's a big difference. So it's like, you get to play who in the West? You get to play the Raiders in the West, right?
Yeah.
You get to play the Chargers instead of playing the Chiefs. Like, okay, that works. Like those are the things where like those 3rd place schedules can make a difference as opposed to playing the 1st place schedule. So we'll see. But I'm expecting somewhere between 10 and 11 wins from this team. And again, if they don't make the playoffs, knocking on the doorstep for the playoffs and just missing at 11-6 or somewhere around there,
Looking at the schedule, because the schedule, there was no way on earth that I was going to go the entire episode not talk about the schedule, because the schedule, this is the first time ever that we're going to have 17 games, 18 week NFL regular season. And the NFL has already come out with the slogan, the biggest season ever. And you look at the Patriots schedule, you got the Dolphins in week 1, and then you got the Jets, and then you got the Saints, and they got the big one with the Buccaneers on Sunday Night Football, October 3rd. And the entire schedule just looks really intriguing. There's 2 games I think that's going to be very interesting to watch, excluding the Tampa Bay game.
Yeah.
Cleveland on November 14th, and as well as Monday Night Football in Buffalo, December 6th. If you look at this schedule and you were to give your early prognostication as to how well this Patriots team will do based on the moves that they've made, what record do you see this team finishing with in 2021?
So I was just saying, right? I think somewhere between 10 and 11 wins. But here's the key, right? The beginning of the year is going to be key,
Huge.
Right? You play Miami at home, you got to win that game. You're playing the Jets in New York. That's got to be a win. You're playing New Orleans at home. I think New Orleans is going to stink this year. You got to win that game. Now you're talking about you're 3-0. Then Tampa comes to town, and I'm sorry, I don't see a way you beat Tampa. So okay, now you're 3-1. Then you play Houston. Come on. So 4-1. Then Dallas is a toss-up. But again, it's home game, maybe. But okay, say 4-2, fine. Then you get the Jets, 5-2.
Mm-hmm.
Then you get the Chargers in LA. You should still win that game, 6-2. Then you're in Carolina, 7-2. They might be the worst team in football this year. Maybe
I disagree. I think they may make noise in the NFC South, depending how well things progress between Matt Rule and Sam Darnold.
That's very true. But if the Patriots lose Sam Darnold, I mean, come on now.
Yeah. I'm just trying to do a little respect, man.
No, I know what you mean. I do know what you mean, though. So let's just say, now they're 7-2.
Yeah.
Then you go into your stretch with Cleveland. So you got Cleveland, Atlanta, Tennessee, Buffalo. That's probably 3 losses right there. But
murderous row right there.
Right. So now you beat Atlanta because Atlanta is Atlanta. They're not that good. But the key is, so the end of the year, you end the year from week 10 to 18. You got Cleveland, Atlanta, Tennessee, Buffalo. Indianapolis, Buffalo. Like
And by the way,
and then
Patriot fans, the Colts, they're going to be a much better team this year. Mark my words.
right. Yeah.
With the addition of Carson Wentz,
Right.
now reunited playing with Frank Wright.
Right.
I mean
Yeah,
that's scary based on what we've seen in 2017 when Reich was in Philadelphia and you saw how good Wentz was. So I think
right.
Indianapolis is not going to be it's not going to be a cakewalk of a team that you're just going to be easily.
Well, and that's it. So to me, it's those first 9 games, right?
Mhm.
You have to be 7-2, at worst 6-3 out of those first 9 games. If you can get to that point where you're 7-2, 6-3, now you get into that tough part of the schedule. And even if you get swept by Buffalo, okay, you lose 2 to Buffalo.
Mhm.
If you can split with Cleveland and Tennessee, if you can beat one of those teams, you're playing them both at home. If you can beat one of those teams, that's huge, right? You're going to beat Atlanta. You're going to beat Jacksonville. And so then it's like, okay, if you beat Atlanta and you beat Jacksonville, there's 9 wins. And then you're saying, okay, if you can split with Cleveland or Tennessee, now you're talking about 10 wins, right? And then it's either Indy, one of the Buffalo games, or Miami. And so it's like, and the Miami game is tough because it's in Miami, last game of the season. They always lose that game.
Oh,
but,
yeah. Mhm.
but if you can win one more of those games between those 4, right?
Yeah.
You look at it and say, okay, that's all we got to do. Then you get to 11 wins, and that should be enough to get you into the playoffs. Even with the 17-game schedule, the 11 wins should still be enough to get you into the playoffs.
Now here's the fastball. The news broke yesterday that the Patriots brought back Brian Hoyer.
Yeah.
And yes, I let out the sigh for a reason because it's like, why?
Right.
So I'm gonna ask you simply. This is part one of a 2-part question. Why did they bring back Brian Hoyer? What was the reasoning and the rationale behind bringing him back to be a backup? When you look at the quarterback room, you already have Mac Jones, who's clearly going to be the starter of the future.
Yep.
Cam Newton, who is very possibly going to be the starter in 2021. I say possibly because you just never know how things work out in training camp.
Yeah.
And as well as Jarrett Stidham. So what was the reason in bringing back Brian Hoyer?
Mac Jones. That's why you bring him back. Mac Jones. Because Hoyer knows the offense better than anyone. Hoyer is essentially another coach, right? And you know, towards the end of Brady's tenure here, when he had Hoyer with him, Hoyer was taking half the game plan, right? So Brady was doing half, Hoyer was doing half, and then they were getting together and, okay, here's what we're going to do. So he was, Brady leaned on him a ton towards the end of his career with the Patriots because he trusted Hoyer. He knew that Hoyer knew what he was doing. And so, yeah, he's not a good player on the field, but behind the scenes, in the locker room, in the meeting rooms, that's where he really has that value. And Cam's still learning the offense. Stidham, it's his 3rd year. Like he doesn't have any real experience. Hoyer has real NFL experience, and Matt can really learn from Hoyer. And I think that he'll be a valuable piece to be around just to learn from him. Right. And so I thought the timing was interesting. It was kind of interesting. It was right after rookie minicamp. So it was kind of like, that's weird. But I wouldn't be surprised. I would not be surprised if the Patriots traded Jarrett Stidham this offseason and rolled with those 3 quarterbacks and had Cam, Hoyer, and Mac. And what they would probably do, if I were the Patriots, what I would probably do is I'd sit Mac on the bench. I'd be like, you're not even dressing for games. You don't, because I don't want Cam to run out there a quarterback in a home game and have Mac sitting on the sideline, the QB of the future, and then Cam has a bad game, and then all of a sudden now it's like by the end of the game they're booing. Where's Mac Jones? He's literally on the sideline. Like I don't want Mac anywhere near the field. Like I want him go sit in the clubhouse. Like don't even come to the games, right? Like practice all week, do your thing, get everyone set, blah, blah, all that other stuff, but don't be there at game day because game day is Cam. And we're not worried about Mac Jones yet, right? So like, no one's gonna be calling for Jared for Brian Hoyer to go in, right? So that's one of those things where it's like, Hoyer's the backup, but he learns from Mac, and that's the biggest thing is that Mac can learn from him. That's the only reason he comes in. I mean, he's not coming in to push Cam, like that's stupid, right? But he's coming in so that Mac can learn from him, and I think, I think maybe it was a good sign where they said, hey, like this kid. Can pick things up, is a quick learner. Like if we bring in Hoyer, this can really, expedite the process. But maybe it was just, what? Like let's bring in Hoyer because we can help. He can help us, and maybe somebody will give us a 5th-round pick for Jarrett Stidham.
Absolutely. Now, the big question. Now, this is part two. Mac Jones. We've already established that Mac Jones is more than likely going to just sit on the bench. He's not going to really start or get much playing time in 2021 unless it's week 18. The Pats already have a playoff spot secured,
Yeah.
and he's just getting his feet wet. Let's go back to draft night because I was thinking about this and I was saying, that first round, that day one of the draft was probably the best day one of the draft that I've seen in quite some time in terms of the talent level at quarterback alone.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of discussion surrounding Mac Jones in terms of where would he land. Is there a chance that maybe San Francisco could take him? Is there a chance that another team like maybe Denver could take a guy like Mac Jones, or obviously who they obviously decided to end up going with Patrick Surtain,
Right.
and whatnot. Going into the draft, how high was Mac Jones on your quarterback chart in terms of the talent level and as well as the scouting coming out of Alabama?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's tough because it's hard to get. It's hard to know, right? Because he played in
Yeah.
Alabama, right? And all those guys were open. But I will say, after he got drafted, I went back and I watched film breakdowns of him. And what I recommend, as I've told a few people this, what I recommend is go to film breakdowns before the draft, right? Because those are unbiased, right? You go to a Patriots breakdown, and the guys that do the breakdowns are great, but they're breaking down a Patriots guy, right? So they're gonna
Trying to make him
naturally,
look good.
yeah, because it's a Patriots guy, right? If you do it before the draft and you go to someone who wasn't a San Fran guy, right? Then they're breaking it down kind of unbiasedly, which is nice. So Matt Wallman and Mark Schofield, who writes for Pat's Pulpit,
Mhm.
did a great job. It's like an hour-long YouTube video, and they just breaking down different plays. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
And so you can see some of the decision making. His big thing, and what Brady did so well, he's going to have to win before the ball snapped. He's not a guy that can freelance like a Trey Lance. That's not him. He's going to have to win pre-snap. And the Patriots offense is designed to do that. If he can get to that point, he's going to be great. I think the ball placement from him was awesome. I think that some of the decision making he made was awesome. I think some of the throws he made were very good. But again, what it's going to come down to is that you don't have the window you had. You probably don't have the time that you had. So can you win pre-snap? Right? And that's going to be the question, right? Can you win pre-snap with all this different stuff that people are throwing at you? And that's going to take time. And that's why, to me, I cannot imagine that he plays at all this year. Like you said, unless it's, the Kansas City method is the method I always come back to.
Mm-hmm.
Give Cam the year. End of the year, if the season is decided either way, he plays week 18, right? They're in the playoffs. They're out of the playoffs. Doesn't matter. He plays week 18. Boom, you give him a game. He gets a start. Next year, Cam has a decent year. He goes somewhere else. Max a starter next year. Like that's what I want to see. And I think Bill, I think no matter what, he's not going to be starting week 1. Like I think no matter what, like he will start Brian Hoyer over Mac Jones because he hates rookie quarterbacks and the mistakes that they make. And so he just does. He hates that. And so we'll see. But I think that's going to be the big question is can he win pre-snap like Brady did? And if he can do that at even close to a consistent level, he's going to be a very good NFL quarterback. And if he can't, he could be fine. But he's going to have to win mentally pre-snap. That's how he's going to have to do it.
Last question I'll ask you. Cam Newton, because there's been so much talk and strife, and even myself included, I didn't want Cam Newton to come back in 2021. Now, with all of the added weapons surrounding him, as we talked about earlier, now do you see Cam Newton having a better year this season in 2021 with the weapons that he's been surrounded with, as well as do you think he'll be able to stay healthy? Because at points there were times that outside of COVID, he just physically was just not there, not able to get the ball down the field.
Yeah. I think that's the question, right? If he can stay healthy, I think he'll be fine. I think the mechanics were an issue last year. His footwork was a mess. And that's why you saw it on the short. The deep passes were mostly fine. it was the short to intermediate passes that were the problem. And so that's not arm strength, that's footwork, right? And so I think the footwork was an issue last year. I think the receiving core was awful last year, right? And so like he had no real receivers last year, whether a wide receiver or a tight end, right? He didn't have anyone. So I think he can only get better than he was last year, right? He can't be as bad as he was last year. So that's the hope there. I was someone who was not. I didn't want Cam back either, but I said, okay, if they bring Cam back, fine, as long as they have a plan for the future. They brought Cam back. They have a plan for the future. I'm okay with it. That's fine. If it was a 1-year deal for Cam and we'll figure it out next year, like I would have been pissed. But
Yeah.
they bring back Cam on a 1-year deal. They draft a rookie quarterback. Now I'm saying, okay, fine. You got a plan. At least you have a plan moving forward. Whether that plan pays off or not, we don't know. But at least you have a plan, and that's good enough for me right now. So I expect him to be much better this year than he was last year. Am I expecting him to throw for 400 yards like ever? Probably not. But but if we can get something, not as good as Seattle, but if we can get something like that where he's throwing for two and not the amount of yards, but the efficiency. If he's throwing for 250 yards a game, a touchdown or two, like that's good enough for me. Like that's good enough. Like that's all he needs to do. You know what I mean? So we'll see. But that's what I'm hoping for this year for him.
It has been absolutely a blast talking with Pat Lane, a co-host of Patriots Nation Pod, writer for Pat's Pulpit of SB Nation. It's been a blast talking to you about the Patriots and hopefully for a much sunnier outlook in 2021. Now that we now know officially that all venues will be back to 100% as of May 29th. So week 1, packed house, one Patriot place in Foxborough. Can't wait. It's been a pleasure speaking with you, Pat.
Hey, thank you so much for having me, man. I really appreciate it. We should do it again sometime.
Absolutely. You got it.